Hi, my name is Clinton Moser, and I'll be talking about the effects of climate change on human health. So, the balance of the world's climate depends on us humans. With temperatures changing due to global warming, the balance of atmospheric gases is being directly affected by pollution, such as fossil fuel emissions. Humans are a delicate species, and without the right balance of these atmospheric gases and other factors such as sunlight, the human species will simply become extinct. Without a radical change to the efficiency of waste disposal and pollution management, the world will become uninhabitable to human beings among other species. So, the ability for the human species to survive the environmental devastations of climate change will depend on these three criteria: fear of species survival, shifts in nutrition, and habitat endangerment. In terms of fear of species survival, we must ask, how will fear come into play with the inevitable change of climate? Well, Mr. Ruprecht, a former dairy farmer, describes this phenomenon. Quote, "We speak about the warmth of Mother Nature, but nature can also be vicious and wild and unforgiving." End quote. Cave 2020. The separation exists between concerned citizens and whether government institutions are going to act before the next environmental disaster. When relating institutional action to the topic of species survival, Australia will find difficulty after experiencing the worst drought and severe fires in their recorded history. Kevin Rudd, former leader of the opposition, sums up this dilemma during the Australian Labor Party's Climate Change Summit, stating that climate change is the greatest moral challenge of our generation. Elliott, 2011. Governments must now focus on who is most vulnerable while setting aside capitalistic values of resource allocation. Distress will now become the motivation. This image is from the recent Australian wildfires and goes to show the importance of what happens during these climate change summits. So now as a human species, we must talk about nutrition shift in relation to climate change. Uh, in this context, our views of carnivorism must be faced. Inevitably, climate change will lead to questions of profitability and livestock productivity. As humans continue to be the top producers in carbon dioxide and methane release, there will become necessary, quote, possible adaptations to pasture and livestock genetics and production system management to ameliorate the impacts of climate change identified here, end quote. More in Garami. So, as we remember watching the documentary Cowspiracy, shows there's become a war between factory farming and natural resources, with capital profits being the motive at the cost of environmental devastation. As climate change continues to divide nations, there becomes an increasing climate war among nations, highlighting issues such as droughts that negatively impact water supplies. This documentary focuses on the reason that corporate industries and environmental activist groups hide the fact from the public that raising animals for food takes 30% of the world's water, 45% of the Earth's land, and causes 91% of the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. Anderson, 2014. Directors Kip Anderson and Keegan Kuhn take a look at an assortment of industries, including agribusiness, fisheries, cattle corporations, and backyard or small farm productions, through an analysis of how animal agricultural industries affect public opinion of a sustainable future. Cowspiracy intends to expose these profit-driven industries from destroying a sustainable and habitable environment for our planet. So the need for veganic farming is expressed in Cowspiracy by showing us how the urgency of changing our behavior towards water consumption and eating habits is expressed by statistical facts. So while the human population drinks 5.2 billion gallons of water and eats 21 billion pounds of food per day, 1.5 billion cows drink 43 billion gallons of water and eat 135 billion pounds of food per day. Anderson, 2014. The issue becomes clear. humans need to stop eating animals. Howard Lyman agrees with this statement, saying, quote, "You can't be an environmentalist and eat animal products, period," end quote. Anderson, 2014. The documenters of Cowspiracy turn to a new focus of a progressive future, veganic farming. The argument against consuming cow's milk is that the milk is designed to turn a 65-pound calf into a 400-pound cow as rapidly as possible. Anderson, 2014. In a capitalistic world based around production, veganic farming is determined to be not only more compassionate, but also more efficient. The future, according to Howard Lyman, is for all environmentalists to live what they profess, and only then will we be on a new course in the world. Scholars and environmentalist activists agree that when you take the animal issue out, you also take the greenhouse gas issue out. Then we can finally live progressively without worrying about food safety issues. Anderson, 2014. So we must now talk about habitat endangerment and how our surrounding environment will impact species survival as a result of climate change. When the mineral contents of rivers change, there may be a consequence to marine life. Analyzing clay content of Australia's rivers provides insight about, quote, "fluctuations in river discharge, availability or absence of a clay source, changes between river and dust input, or vacations in ocean currents, the latter that of the potential to transport clays further offshore or alongshore." Gengel and Decker, 2004. So, similarly to the study of mineral content in rivers, there's much to be discovered about the balance of salt and water. With climate change comes questions of access to water and the quality of life inside bodies of water. Studies of water quality will put management decisions among catchment managers who have, quote, "dual objectives of returning more perennial vegetation to the landscape and managing water resources, security, and quality for a range of uses," end quote. Austin, 2008. Fossil records may indicate that species survival is not random. Daly and Ehrlich, 1996. This relates to the habits of species in relation to human-dominated landscapes. For the survival of an organism, the varying stressors are indicated by factors such as heat shock, metabolic stress, exposure to microgravity, hydration, nicotine, ethanol or heat stress, radiation stress, carcinogenic stress. Ray, 1999. With this in mind, there are human-induced stressors that factor into the survival of many species. With the current trend of global warming, there is an uncertain future for climate-sensitive species. The question remains unanswered regarding how will we secure the survival of species when we continue to fragment their habitable landscapes. The results are not stochastic, as the future of these landscapes are determined in whether the human species will be collaborative on planet preservation. In order to take steps towards this collaborative effort, Henney, 2004, suggests that we focus on species most threatened by landscaping processes. Fragmentation, for example, may be used to guide revegetation programs to satisfy the needs of these sensitive species. So now we need to start to understand the effect of human health in relation to climate refugees, all in the context of climate change. And the global impact of climate change goes into depth of how human health can be affected by climate change. As it relates to international politics, environmental refugees and mass immigration will directly affect the global economy and political relations. The filmmakers gather information by traveling to disaster-affected areas and interviewing influential politicians and scholars. The human impact on global climate can affect international politics, allowing for an increased strain on the social fabrics of community relationships. Human health will not only be impacted by stressors such as losing a son in a flood, but also by the resulting food devastations from such a flood. Already, 10% of food grain is being lost due to rising temperatures. Climate change is a matter of science due to how studies how effects of temperature and weather changes can affect many aspects of human life, from food and drinkable water supplies to migration and day-to-day struggles. White and Heckenberg, 2014. The theories that protest climate change are often driven by special interest groups or dogma. Observations are commonly used in peer-reviewed science literature that proves to provide insight for future changes in terms of the, quote, physics, chemistry, and biology affecting the climate system, end quote. White and Heckenberg, 2014. So, my conclusion is this. What does it mean to survive anymore? Humans tend to move like the wind, finding the next location to inhabit, with space exploration reaching the point of inhabiting Mars. Will climate change affect the survival of the human species? We study and predict changes in the weather every day, yearning to know future outcomes. Climate controls cultures, determining what activities may be accomplished outdoors or which communities must focus on staying indoors for now. When it comes to expanding knowledge to technical aspects predicting future weather outcomes, the first to know will find the safest ground to survive. However, when it comes to protecting the survival of all species, it is the responsibility of humans to do so.